I saw one on Pinterest that I liked, and so I made a moss wall for myself. I went to the craft store, I bought a frame, and I bought some moss, and I glued the moss on the frame. And I thought to myself, why don't I try and make this a little hobby Etsy business? In 2018, my husband was starting to see more and more of these projects getting specified on plans. And he's like, Lindsay, I think that this is a business. And I was like, I don't think it's a business. Well, we've done 1,000 moss walls. It is a business. We've sold millions and millions of dollars of moss walls. So it's really amazing.
Hello and welcome to My Great Pivot. I'm Carrie Regan, and I share inspiring stories of brave, bold, and brilliant female entrepreneurs, women who risk it all to pursue their passion. In this episode, you'll meet Lindsay Scherr Burgess, founder of Green Wallscapes. This company is unique. The Green Wallscapes team creates and installs stunning moss walls. These are handmade works of art that add a maintenance-free touch of the outdoors to inside spaces. Lindsay and her team have created over 1,000 moss walls for clients across the U.S. and Canada, including one that stretched 28 feet long and 10 feet high. Now, if you haven't seen a moss wall before and want a little context for this episode, I encourage you to check out the company's gallery at greenwallscapes.com. I've also included a few pictures in the video version of this podcast on the My Great Pivot YouTube channel with links at mygreatpivot.com. Lindsay holds nothing back in our conversation, sharing the challenges she's encountered building her business, lessons learned along the way, and her unfiltered opinion of today's hustle culture. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did.
Lindsay Scherr Burgess of Green Wallscapes, the moss boss herself. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
I can't wait to hear your story. First, tell me, what is Green Wallscapes?
Green Wallscapes makes preserved moss walls, which are walls that look alive, but they are not alive. And so far, we've done over 1,000 projects all over the US and Canada. We specialize in large-scale commercial applications of preserved moss walls with logos or without logos, mostly in large corporate campuses, as well as multifamily and hospitality.
And how did you come up with this idea?
I think the way that everyone starts a business, which is I saw one on Pinterest that I liked, and then there wasn't a company in the United States when I was looking at them that had something within my budget. And so I made a moss wall for myself. I went to the craft store, I bought a frame, and I bought some moss, and I glued the moss on the frame. And at that time, there weren't a lot of companies. I think there was like probably one or two companies in the United States that was doing this at any kind of scale. And I thought to myself, why don't I try and make this a little hobby Etsy business? And so for about 1.5 years, I ran it as an Etsy store. And then in 2018, the project that I was working on was ending, and my husband was starting to see more and more of these projects getting specified on plans. And he's like, Lindsay, I think that this is a business. And I was like, I don't think it's a business. Well, we've done 1,000 moss walls. It is a business. We've sold millions and millions of dollars of moss walls. And so I have a team in my West Palm Beach studio. We have a 2,500 square foot studio, and we've done this year alone, we've done over 3,000 square feet of moss walls.
That is amazing. So before that, your career was very circuitous. You'd worked in construction, you'd worked in real estate, you'd worked in marketing. Were you at a point where you were looking for something that you could call your own?
You know, I could feel energetically that I wanted to try something that was mine. I had grown a lot of other people's businesses, from commercial real estate to organic produce and other things like that. And I just had a sense that I should try again. I didn't think it was going to be the moss walls, honestly, but I was like, all right, well, I'll try this. And luckily I have a husband who is very, very supportive and was like, just see if you can do it for 6 months. And that really took a lot of the pressure off of me, because I think that I was one of those people that was like, no, this isn't a business. I don't think that this is a thing. And he was like, just try it. And so I think that that is something that, you know, was a real gift, because not everyone has such a supportive spouse or is going to give you that window of time to try something. And I will say it got traction very, very quickly, though, because we were early to the game and the demand was there. And then when the pandemic hit, we had about 8 weeks of, oh my God, what is this going to be? And then it exploded in late 2020 into 2021. And, you know, 2021 was probably our best year in terms of the business, just because it was just so out of control. There was so much building and so much renovation happening during that time because there was no one in spaces. So now all those spaces were empty and they could do all that work that they've wanted to do. So It's been a wild, wild ride. Let's just put it that way.
Now, did you consider any other businesses before you went all in on the moss?
Well, yes, I've had other companies that I tried that failed epically, but always like one thing led to another thing. I had a business that was selling energy management systems, and it was just the sales cycle was so long and it wasn't enough money to do that. But that's actually how I met my husband, because I cold called him about something. So you never know, like everything leads to everything else. And the basic fundamental structure of business is the same, whether you're selling moss walls, you're building giant buildings, you have a business to consumer e-com company. It's the same fundamental levers of marketing, sales, product, operations, and finance. And you just have to pull these different levers. And once you figure all of that out, then it's, do I have too much supply? Do I have too much demand? Where am I? And I haven't figured out the solution yet. I have usually want too much of one or too much of the other. There's no balance in any of this. And so you just have to kind of like roll with it, right? And keep experimenting and having an open mind. The one thing I will tell you is that it has been a real joy, and it was my dream to have a successful business. But what I don't think I understood about having a successful business was like all the other elements that I would have to put in place, and my own resilience when things went wrong, and things went terribly wrong, to just keep going even when it's really, really hard. And then I had a baby in the middle of it also. So, we like to add things on.
I think so many women are afraid to make that first step because they're afraid of making a mistake. I don't want to go down this rabbit hole if this isn't going to turn into a real business. But you make such a good point that you are going to learn along the way. You might make mistakes. This might not be the one, but you are going to learn valuable lessons along the way that could turn into something.
And I think that like one thing leads to another, and women have the benefit of being great listeners. So if you keep hearing that your girlfriends have X, Y, or Z problem, solve the problem. None of my friends came to me and said, I need a moss wall. But when I did the marketing, when I started, it was like $2 a day on Etsy. I mean, the great thing about e-com now, if you do go into physical products, is that you can test things and see if there's actually a market for it very cheaply. So you don't even have to like invest $1 bazillion in product and you can pre-sell things. You can try different stuff and see what resonates and sticks, and you don't have to spend a ton of money. And then one thing's going to stick, the other thing's not going to stick, and you just have to keep experimenting. And the problem is that everything changes all the time. So, the world in 2018 is very different than the world in 2025, right? And there's some things that are very similar, but there's other things that have changed a lot. And so we've had to roll with a lot of punches in the last 7-8 years. And you just have to keep evolving. And now with all the AI stuff, I have to learn that now too. I make moss walls. Why do I have to learn about AI? But okay, here we are. This is what we're doing now. You just have to keep learning, growing, and evolving as technology and as the world changes and as trends change and shift also.
Yeah. Well, and I do want to touch on how you've evolved your product over the past few years. But first, we have to go back and give props to John, your husband, for supporting you in this business. Do you think the fact that he himself was an entrepreneur helped him not only push you and encourage you to do this, but also know that it's going to take time, that you might not see results right away?
He, I think, really sees opportunities before a lot of people do. And I think that he understands that, he knew that it was going to take time. And he did give me a lot of grace because he also bought his company that he was working for at the same time that, I started the business, and we bought our house, which sounds like a monster outlay. And we were broke, beyond broke, for like 5 years after that, just to be very clear. And that's the other thing too, is you have to be really comfortable being poor for a really long time when you take this on. And that's not everyone's business. I mean, I think that there's some people who are like jumping out. They have digital businesses and things like that where they're just making a lot of money and it's not costing them a lot of money. But if you're making physical products, it can take a long time to start making money actually doing this stuff.
I think that a lot of women need to hear that too, because a lot of people hear the Sarah Blakely stories, see the very prosperous business, and they don't hear about the lean times early on where things could have gone under. And so they get discouraged if those lean times hit, or maybe they're not as financially prepared to weather those financial storms.
If you want to have a Gucci lifestyle as you are running your startup and you're not funded, you're not going to make it because you need to be like in student survivor mode for 3 years, 5 years, whatever. The other thing that I don't talk a lot about is that my husband actually got so stressed out and overwhelmed between all the financial pressure that he ended up in the hospital. And so, yeah, he almost died from the stress. It forced him to take a look and say, like, I can't keep running my business like this. He worked for basically 2 years straight, like without taking breaks. And in the beginning, too, if you have something that's working, it isn't 9 to 5. It is all the time. Now, it depends. I don't want to say that because it could be that your approach is, I'm going to take this on from 6 o'clock at night till 9 o'clock at night, and I'm going to just do whatever I can, and I'm going to build this really slowly over time. And this is going to be my little side hustle until it can be my main hustle. Some people have to start doing businesses that way. Other people can take all of their time and resources and just run with it. And some people are stupid like me and my husband and just do it anyway and then think that we're brilliant and we can make it work. All the approaches are different. And then it changes too if you have children or you don't have children. That was something that I learned. You make different choices. I mean, my husband and I were childless until 3 years ago. So that makes a difference in how you run your business and how you run your life and how much time you have for that. We had unlimited time for years, to be able to do this. So it was working weekends. It was working Saturdays and Sundays. It was just thinking about it, even when we weren't working on it. It was coming back and problem solving. You go on vacation for a week and you'd have 3 weeks of problem solving when you got back, all that kind of stuff. You have to be like, all right, I'm going to be a little bit nuts, but the long term is going to be better potentially by me doing this. And one of the smart things that John did say to me was, Lindsay, try for 6 months. If it doesn't work and you're not getting traction, go get a job. Who cares? And that really helped me because I think that sometimes I go so far down a rabbit hole of, oh, well, what if this and what if that? And we try this thing and it doesn't work. You have no idea what's going to happen when you start what you're doing. So even with a plan, I mean, everyone writes all these plans and projections and they think that this thing's going to sell and this thing's going to sell. And like, actually, it's like what they want is over here. A great example, Stanley cups. Stanley has had those giant cups forever. They made them pink and they sold 1 billion of them. Okay. And they got the Utah influencer moms to talk about it and they sold 1 billion Stanley cups. It's ridiculous. And so you don't always know everything that's going to happen, right? I'm sure Stanley Cup had like a projection for the year, like we're going to sell this many to this many workers. And then the Utah moms came out and magically they had a massive business. And that's what's really amazing about being a business owner is because you get to have these kind of like surprise moments. But on the flip side, you have to be okay with a lot of uncertainty.
And I think there are certain personality types, and my guess is that you and John are among them, where you'd perhaps be more drained in a standard 40-hour week where you're punching it at 9 and leaving at 5 than you are running your own business. There's that certain energy that running your own business gives you where, a 9
I say that sometimes.
And the bureaucracy, dealing with the bureaucracy and dealing with, lovely corporate America, you can be draining in a different way.
So I had never worked in a large corporate. Actually, that's not true. I had an internship once where I worked in a very large company and I was faxing things because it was that long ago. And I liked being able to like go home and turn it off. But I do remember that kind of drained feeling that I felt where it was like, is this it? Like I'm going to college and then I'm going to come out and fax things. That's going to be my whole thing.
Oh, dear, you'll be emailing soon enough.
And so I think that was one of those, kind of surprising things you think that you're going to get out. And even if it is a big corporate job, these big responsibilities of doing this and that, but especially when you're starting it out, you're just sending emails or testing something super basic or whatever. You're not making those decisions till, 20 years in or whatever. And I've always been someone who likes to make decisions and do that kind of stuff. On the flip side, there are definitely times when I look at my friends with like those nice salaries, those nice fat salaries,
Security,
that security,
health insurance.
It's a different thing. You just, you pick your poison.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. I haven't figured out anybody who has it perfect yet. I just haven't. And I just think like if you're working in the world and you have to work, then this is what you put up with. These are the choices that you make. Am I happier being an entrepreneur? Absolutely, because I roll in here at 10:30 in the morning because I need my morning time because it's the only time I have to myself during the day. That would not fly in corporate America. But on the flip side, next week when I'm on vacation, I'll be checking my email, making sure that, it isn't hitting the fan and that, my team's okay and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, trade-offs. Pick your poison. I love
Your
that.
poison, exactly.
Now, there's that big step for female entrepreneurs, the coming out moment, when you go out on LinkedIn or Facebook, social media, wherever, and say, this is my business. Do you remember that moment when you said, this is the day I'm going to switch from this being my side hustle to a company and announced it to the world? Or was it more gradual?
I did have a photographer come, like we had made a couple little moss pieces and I had a photographer come to my house and like take these really pretty photos and, like, hey guys, I'm doing this. I did have a full coming out on LinkedIn. And then every single person that messaged me or said congratulations, I sent a link to my website. I was like, if there's anybody that that can, and that was a lot of time, trying to like drum up some additional business. Cause at that time, we were doing like really small pieces. We were doing tiny 3 foot by 5 foot or smaller things. And I was just taking whatever would come in. Right. And then, slowly, it grew into what it is now, which is, I have a salesperson, I have a project coordinator, I have studio manager, I have all these people around me who keep this engine going.
When you did announce it, were people receptive? Were they encouraging? Were they as encouraging as John, or were some people like, girl, what are you doing?
Everybody was encouraging. I think probably my mother was like, oh, you're not going to go get a job. And I was like, I think your whole life has been like, when are you going to get a job, Linz? How about a job now? Like you've done all this weird stuff. I worked so many weird jobs, but when you are someone who is interested in a lot of different things and you have a background in marketing and sales, you're like, I could just sell that. That's cool. But I don't know. I just was like, let's try it. And everyone was super encouraging. I think even more encouraging. And then there was times where I was like, this is really slow. I'm not sure that this is a thing. And then someone would send me a note like, hey, Linz, I'm so proud of you for going out on your own and trying. And those moments were really, really helpful. Like, it's not the beginning. It's kind of like when you have a baby. When you have a little tiny baby, like everyone comes and they bring all this stuff. It's 6 to 12 months in that you need someone to come and be like, you're doing a great job. I haven't forgotten about you.
I love that analogy. And I think it's so different for our parents just because the work world was so different for them. It was normal for them to get in a job and be in that job for 20, 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they hear about layoffs hitting, somebody getting laid off, for them is catastrophic because this wasn't a natural part of their work world 30, 40 years ago, whenever. Whereas now it's it's the norm. To hear that somebody's been with one company for 10 years is kind of,
are you okay?
Yeah.
Like, can you get a job somewhere else? Like,
exactly.
oh, like it there?
Yeah, you need to get out and experience other companies. You don't want to get stuck in one place for so long.
Right.
Now, you talked about how initially you were doing these 3x5 pieces, and then you moved on to these massive pieces, 250 square feet for a single piece. Do you remember the first order that you got for a massive piece? And was it gradual, or did you get this one and think, oh my God, can we really do this?
Yeah. So very early on, I had a woman come into our studio when we were downtown West Palm, and there was a woman who walked in and she goes, I see what you're doing, and I think it's really cool. And I have an 8 foot by 8 foot wall. And at that time, I had never done an 8 foot by 8 foot wall. So to me, that was like incomprehensible. And she also said, I don't want a moss wall. I want a succulent wall. And I said, we don't do succulents. And she goes, you do now. So I am forever grateful to her because, first of all, she helped us to develop a completely different style that nobody else was doing at the time. Because people were doing like succulents and planters, but they weren't putting them on the moss walls. And so I was like, all right. So I had to go find a succulent supplier locally. I went to like the most expensive florist here in Palm Beach that does faux succulents. And I was like, all right, let me buy some of these and try this thing. And we did an 8 foot by 8 foot wall. And I remember the installation was just like such a mess. And we just didn't know what we were doing. And it still turned out gorgeous. And we used that as a stepping stone for many more large walls after that. You just have to get one. It's like the first big corporation. I think we did a project for Walmart's corporate offices, like a meditation room in Walmart's corporate offices, like within a couple months. So then I got to put on my website that I had done a project for Walmart. And then there was another project. Oh, I did some lettering for Southwest Airlines, like some moss lettering for Southwest Airlines for an event. And then I had to put Southwest Airlines on my website. So then it became like, wow, look at Lindsay. Like she's got all these big corporate clients. She can handle these kinds of projects. And I think another turning point was in 2019, I did the Kips Bay Decorator Show House here in West Palm, which is one of those show houses where people decorate for 6 or 8 weeks and everyone goes in and they take a million photographs. And the staircase project that we worked on was in all these major publications. We were in Architectural Digest, we were in Veranda Magazine. We had gotten some like major PR, and it just puts you in like a different category, in terms of like people being like, okay, this is a serious business. We know these people can handle that kind of project. Because one thing I will say is that no one wants to be first, like when it comes to being your customer. So if you're selling food, the first major grocer retailer that you get, you can then say, hey, we've got Target. Let's get Kroger and Safeway and Giant and all the other, big people. No one ever wants to be the first one to like give you that opportunity. So once you get that opportunity, then you can say like, hey, I did this wall for this person, or hey, I sold this thing to these people. And then it just puts you in that different category to, even if you like gave it to them for free, you're like, this person has my stuff. And they, then it really does change the trajectory.
And speaking of freebies, in terms of marketing, you mentioned you started off on Etsy. After that, like what kind of advertising did you do? Were you mostly word of mouth? Did you do any freebies and giveaways in order to spread legitimacy and word of mouth?
No, very frankly, no, I didn't do that. I was lucky that basically my $2 a day on Etsy that I was doing advertising. Now I spend a lot more money on Etsy and all the other platforms, but then I was doing $2 a day on Etsy was enough to literally fill up my time and my team's time. And so it was just me and at one point one girl, then there were 2 girls, then there were 3 girls, things like that. It was never, it was just like 4 of us working on these walls, and there were enough of them coming through that platform at that time. And then the pandemic hit. And then again, the Etsy stuff was still working. It worked probably almost all the way through the pandemic. And then we kind of fell off a cliff. And then it became, okay, I've got to look at other ways of bringing in opportunities. Another place that we got some opportunities was LinkedIn, because I have a pretty big following / group of people that I'm connected with there. So those people, would bring in some of the bigger opportunities, like, oh, I saw your stuff on LinkedIn, and oh, hey, can you do this for somebody else? And so like, that's kind of a weird place. You'd think like an Instagram or Pinterest or something, but actually for our business, a lot of the professionals that we do work with, they're also on LinkedIn, and that's where we connect with them and stay in touch. So that's just part of our marketing mix. Do I know exactly where everybody is coming from? No, I do not know where all these opportunities are coming from. A lot of times people have to see you in multiple places. You kind of have to be omni-channel at this point, and then hope that you can kind of hit people from all the different angles.
Right. Building up that brand across multiple channels so that, again, you're gaining that legitimacy. You mentioned early on there weren't a lot of other companies that were actually doing this in the US. I imagine that's changed over the last 8 years.
It has changed a lot. Yeah. Yeah. So at our scale, there's still probably, I would say 6 to 8 in the United States that can do something at our scale, that can do it as well as we do, 2 or 3, in terms of like the way that the final product looks. And then there are a lot of people who are bad at moss walls who do other things, like they do interior landscaping, or they do other adjacent interior finish businesses, and they have no business doing moss walls. I'm like, oh God, that is so bad. Please stop trying to do that. They think it's easy. They think it's like, oh, okay, we're just going to glue some moss to things. No, it's like, we spent years refining our processes so that there is a whole process for like how we cut things, how we tailor them so that they look a certain way. We have quality control in place for all this stuff. So we rip out moss after a piece is done because it doesn't look the way that we want it to look. There's a lot of nuance to this to make it look like something refined and good. Yes, of course, anybody can glue moss to anything else, but to make it look really good and finished, there's a big, big gap there.
You've mentioned bringing in artificial succulents on your moss walls, and that was something other people weren't doing. So was that one of the levers you pulled to make your product look different? Are there any other strategies that you employed to make your product stand out in the market? Quality and succulence?
Yeah, high quality. But I will tell you another thing that is really basic that a lot of people are like, oh, well, anybody can do that. Pick up the phone. That's it. Pick up the phone, respond quickly, respond when people ask you questions, be exceptionally good to work with and easy to work with as you are doing the project. And then stay in touch with people after you're done and make sure that they're okay. And amazingly, they will come back to you if you do all of those things and execute those. I can't tell you how many walls and how many repeat clients we've had just because they're like, these people are really easy and wonderful to work with. And if we make a mistake, we clean it up. If there's an issue with shipping, we fix it. Like, we do whatever we need to do to make sure that the client is super happy. And yes, it's hurt our bottom line in the short term in some cases, but the long-term implication of that is that people come back to us over and over and over again. And the product, I think, speaks for itself. It is exceptionally beautiful. And so, people see our work and people have been like, wow, you're setting the standard for these projects. And we've done some really amazing things.
They look absolutely gorgeous. With that first client who had the 8x8 wall, were you vulnerable with her? Did you admit we've never done anything this big before?
No, sure, we can do this. And when do you need? And I was like, all right, well, if I've got to glue the moss on the weekend to get this done on time, like, I don't care. And that's the thing is, in the beginning, you do not have the luxury of saying no. You just have to say yes, and you have to figure it out. And so, and then eventually over time, you figure out what you're good at, how to get the customers that want what you have, and then deliver for them in a really, really smooth and exceptional way. And it's not more complicated than that. It's all very simple, but the actual doing of it is not that simple. You just want to be really, really good and easy and fun to work with and do great things and keep your standards super high and make it happen. And also be flexible and open. The other thing I would say is because this is it verges on art. A lot of people are like, well, do you ever make stuff that you think is ugly? And I was like, absolutely. And we do, because that's what the client wants. I don't have an ego about what the client likes. There are many times when I have said, my suggestion is this design, and they go with a different design. I don't care. It's paying for my studio. It's paying for my team. Everybody's still employed. We're doing great.
If it's what the client wants, but it'll still be that high quality that people expect.
We're going to do all our part to make it as exceptionally good as possible. But if the client wants something that I don't think is aesthetically pleasing, fine. We had a client once and they wanted like these really ugly, like fake agave plants. And I was like, are you sure? Like, are you sure? Like, we don't have to use these. We used them. They loved them. They're super happy. And then I actually sold another one. I love it because, again, the aesthetic of Palm Beach is one thing, and the aesthetic of Miami is another thing. The aesthetic of the Southwest is completely different. California is different. When you work all over the country, you get different vibes and aesthetic from, all these different people. So it's really fun. It's really interesting.
And you have worked in over 30 states, did I see?
Yeah, we worked probably like 36, 37 states in the U.S. at this point. Yeah. There's like a few weird ones that I just haven't. If anybody in Idaho wants a moss wall, I'll give you a really good deal.
Speaking of that, what is your pricing strategy, knowing that you do have these competitors out there in the marketplace who might be bidding on the same jobs?
So we are not the most expensive and we're not the cheapest. We've even lost opportunities and people have come back to us because of how diligent we've been in our sales process, where someone went with somebody cheaper, they got what they paid for. And then they were like, I can't work with these people. It's impossible. There is a certain price per square foot that these things range in. There's people who sell them for like $100 to $200 a foot. And we've done projects as high as $300 a square foot when they're super complicated and they're smaller and there's a lot of detail work and things like that. I will say that it is more, you want to be priced where you're busy, but you're not overwhelmed, because if you're overwhelmed, it means your price is not high enough. And I went through a phase where I was overwhelmed and we won every single project because I didn't have the infrastructure. My team wasn't making the kind of money that my team's making. Like, we could make those numbers work. I can't make those numbers work anymore. And I also don't like to burn out my team for no reason. Like, we don't make any extra money by killing the people that work for me, to shove in a couple more projects a month. I like to keep it, and this is my personality, I like to keep it a little bit more copacetic. Would I like to build the business up so I could have one more full-time Moss person? Absolutely. But I just don't want a whole lot more than that, because I found with my personality and having had at one point 14 people working for me, the amount of infighting, the amount of drama, the amount of other things that go on when you start getting into these bigger teams, especially on the production side, that I experienced, it was just unpleasant. And it just puts a lot of pressure on the bottom line. So if you have a bad month or two, it really can suck all your money. So I have the right number of people now. I have the right amount of material coming in. There's all these different things. Like when you're making things, physically making things, I import material from Europe and from Canada. And then obviously we have suppliers in the US. I do not buy Chinese moss. There's really bad stuff that's coming out of Asia. I don't buy any of that because it's just terrible quality. And so, but I do compete sometimes with the Asian market because they are going up and competing with us. And when they win the walls and the walls come in and they look ugly and all this kind of stuff, then I'm like, you got what you paid for. Again, take your poison.
You touched on hiring, and that's a point that I don't want to miss. That is a huge milestone. When you decide this business isn't just me anymore, I'm bringing on other people. Can you talk about that transition and all the math behind that? And when you realized, be it that first person or that sixth, seventh, eighth, 14th person, when it was right to add another body to the mix?
Carrie, you're giving me too much credit on the math department. So it was like, okay, we start this thing. I start with me and a contractor, basically someone helping me like whenever they had time, and that was what we were doing for like a couple months. Then I was like, okay, I really need someone who's more available than this contractor, a little bit more reliable than this contractor. So let me bring on one full-time person. And like, I think I can fill their time. And then that person's now fully subscribed. Okay, so I think I got to bring in somebody else. And I think that the bank account's going in the right direction. So this is not how you run a business, by the way. This is just how I did it. So then I got up to about 5. And, it was me. And then one of the girls was like sort of the studio manager person. And then there were 4 other girls that were doing the production under her. And then when the pandemic hit and things started to get really, really out of control, we started putting some systems in place. We started, start having accountability and meetings and coming up with how we communicate across our team, from sales into project management, into production, all that kind of stuff. We developed, a process for design, all these things that we did not have. I don't know how we sold anything. If I think about it now, people just sent me money and then I just made something and sent it to them. And like, they had no idea what they were getting. I mean, it was just crazy, right? And it's just not how we would do business right now. And then during the pandemic, it was craziness. We had so many people in here. It was totally out of control. There was tons of infighting. Some of the people who had been with me for a while were like, we want to have bigger jobs. So I was giving them bigger jobs, but then they weren't doing that great at those bigger jobs. And I was having to like navigate all of that. It was so messy. And what I found with my personality personally is that I would rather just like have a copacetic team that gets along for the most part, and then enjoy working with who I'm working with and having it go at like a more normal pace where we're still doing great stuff and we're still crushing, but like it's not feeling like we are never going to catch up. I mean, there was a point where we had 40 projects a month and it was way too much. There were so many mistakes. There was never enough material. We were substituting and moving. It was a mess and it was super stressful. And honestly, I don't think we made that much more money because we had to have so many more people doing it. And then we didn't price the projects correctly because we didn't know. And we had to fix things that we didn't do correctly and all this kind of stuff. And that happens when you grow too quickly, right? And the infighting. I hired a studio manager who had a lot of experience. And then I put him over the people who had been with me for 3 years at that point, and they got all pissed. And then they were like trying to sabotage him. And I mean, it was like thing after thing. So it took about, I'd say like 2.5 years to clean all that up.
Wow. It's almost like it had become the corporate America nightmare that you wanted to avoid in the first place.
Exactly. And I was like, I'm not having fun doing this. I hate these people and I'm paying them and I hate this. Like, that's not what I signed up for this for. I had to get really clear on what did I want the business to feel like and look like? And then how was I going to make that possible? And I also had to get past my own fear of firing people. I had to make some really hard decisions about people who either weren't delivering or they were delivering, but they were disrupting the team and creating a lot of problems. And we just put up with like a lot of bullshit, honestly, for a long time. And then, I got real clear on like, I'm not doing that anymore. And that might also be because when I became a mother, I just, my tolerance for that went way, way down because I was like, I do not have a lot of time to spend away from my child. And if I'm going to spend this time away from my child, it better be 1, lucrative, 2, fun, and 3, we crush it and make beautiful stuff because I'm not doing this otherwise.
I want to talk about that journey with motherhood coming into the picture, how it impacted your business, how it impacted your outlook on your business.
So I had spent a couple of years working with a coach to help me get out of all the things that I was bad at. So I'm not the most organized. I have an entrepreneurial brain. I'm like, oh, shiny object. Oh, I like to learn things. Oh, I like to. Ooh. And so when you have that kind of brain, I'm like the person who likes to start shit. I'm not the person who likes to run shit and keep it moving. It's just not my personality. I like to sell things. I like to do podcasts. I like to learn about the newest marketing toy that there is out there. Now there's so many new fun toys that we get to work with, right? And so when you get a couple years in the business, now you've done, at the beginning, it's like super fun because everyone, wants your stuff and you finally have something they want. But after like 150, 200 moss walls, at some point you're like, okay, I've done moss walls. I know how to make them. I know. So I met this coach. He helped me put systems in place so that my team could be much more effective. And also I could figure out, am I making money? Am I not making money? How do I quote these things properly? Putting in all that stuff that you're supposed to put in the beginning and supposed to think about ahead of time, probably all that education that you went into was like, yeah, you didn't do that the right way. But it doesn't matter. I didn't do it the right way and it still worked.
Yeah.
And so then it became like really taking myself and learning how to delegate, learning how to put these systems in place, writing down standard operating procedures that matter. Every aspect of project coordination is written down. Every aspect of fabrication is written down because the process, even if a wall is 3 foot by 5 foot or it's 500 square feet, it's the same process that we go through for design and construction and everything else. So it was like I had to learn how to put all those systems in place. So by the time, I would say probably like early, let's see, when did I get pregnant? Early 22. We had done a lot of that work already.
Great.
And so I remember having this thought, like, I'm a little bored. Like that was my thought. I did it. Let's have the baby. And I literally had the thought, it's okay. I can have a baby now. That was my thought.
Love it.
And then my little Skylar, she showed up. And then it becomes, you're sick, but you can't tell your team you're sick for like 3 months because you don't know if the baby's going to stick. You don't know if there's going to be any issue, all that kind of stuff. And you feel like total garbage while, for those first couple of months. Then you start to feel better and you start to feel more like yourself again. And you're trying to like wrap up all this stuff, but you're also kind of in this float. Your brain is in this. I mean, it's literally like changing and all this gray matter is growing and making you just like in this sort of floaty space where everything's kind of fine, you're bringing a human into the world and like, who gives a shit about, whether or not your team's actually doing what they're supposed to be doing and the systems are supposed to be working and all that kind of stuff. And then you have the baby, there's all the postpartum stuff, which is really, really interesting. And then you come back and you realize that your team has not been following all the processes and procedures and you have to spend 6 months cleaning everything up, which is what happened to me. And I didn't have guardrails in place for that because I didn't really care. I was just like, I'm growing a human right now. Like, it is what it is, that kind of thing. And like I said, I had the luxury of it being fine, right? Because when you're making tons of sales, it doesn't matter. And then towards like the end of 2022, the economy started to shift because the interest rates started going up. People started reassessing budgets and things like that. And I started to notice more of a palatable difference, like by mid 23. And so, it follows the exact trajectory of what's going on in real estate sales and everything like that, just based on the interest rates. So when you have a luxury product, you are also one of the first things that people decide not to do when, they're making those kinds of decisions. And so it's been an interesting evolution. And then honestly, like last year, my baby was small and I was doing the best I could. And the business did not do as well as I would have wanted it to. The election did not help. People did not make any decisions basically from July until November. And then I was like just dealing with stuff in my personal life. So I was less focused on it. what I learned was that I also need to figure out, like I brought a salesperson in because I couldn't focus on the company in the same way that I had done previously. And so those were things that were a real learning experience last year. And this year's been going a lot better. So that's been really good. And I think that there's going to be years where you crush it and you're focused and you care. And there's going to be other years where, like, frankly, I didn't care last year. And I know that that's not really a thing, because entrepreneurs are always supposed to be all in all the time. Every second of every day, I'm hustling and I'm growing and I'm sticking my face in ice water and I'm getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning and I'm, journaling and no, you're going to have seasons. I talked to a woman at one point because I was at my wit's end with a small baby and all this infighting with my team. And I thought to myself, like, I can't be in this anymore. I'm just going to go be a mom. I'm good. And I talked to this business broker who was also a mom, and she gave me very good advice. She said, this is not the time you're making any choices about your business.
Mm.
And I'm so grateful to her for that. She goes, because even if you get X, Y, or Z dollars for this business, that's 2 years of salary or 3 years of salary for you. And then what are you going to do?
Yeah.
We spent the last 8 years building this thing. Why don't you just let it ride for 2 years? You can always pick it back up and, put the heavy engines and slam the marketing and do all these things that I'm starting to now do and get really back more into, like going to the networking events and spending the time promoting the company and all this kind of stuff, so that you can build it up to what it could be. And you could launch other product lines and it can be on your own terms. And you can work 10:30 to 5, and that's going to be sufficient for you for a couple of years. And then you can grind it out in a couple of years if you want to. And, I'm really grateful for that advice, because I think that, like, I would have not been fulfilled just being home, honestly. I think it would have been fun for a little bit. And then I would have been like, oh my God, I can't do this. And the other thing too was that she's right. The money wouldn't have made sense, because by the time you pay the taxes and do all this kind of stuff, it just wouldn't have made sense. So I'm grateful to her that she was like, you don't make a lot of decisions after you have a baby. You don't make decisions after your husband dies. Those are not the moments that you're making any sort of major life choices. And that's because they're major life transitions. And then you get to get yourself back after a couple of years if you have enough support and all that kind of stuff, to where you can start making those decisions from a healthier brain space. That's my take on it, being a female in the business working world.
I love that notion of seasons that you mentioned, where there are going to be times where you do have the energy to put your foot on the gas, and other times where you do just want to coast a little bit, and that's okay. And that the objective of a business shouldn't always be profit, profit, profit. People are in it for different reasons. Some people want that balance. Some people want to be able to take more time with family. My husband went into a career where he had a young son. He wanted to be able to take full days off when he could in order to be with him. So it's not just profit, as much as the hustle culture wants us to believe that's the sole barometer of success with these businesses.
Absolutely. And to me, it's like, I can live the lifestyle I want to lead. I have a great team now that I really like being around, and it's fun. And it's really satisfying when a client says, this is so beautiful, and I cannot believe that this is in my space. I still am so happy when that happens. Like, I didn't think it was going to look this good, and it looks better than I thought, or whatever. It's just really, really cool. We also take on projects where people are like, well, I talked to 4 other companies and they weren't going to do it. It's too far outside the wheelhouse. I'm like, I got you. Like, we can do it.
Looking back over the last 8 years, are there any things that you look at where you say, that I did well, that set me up for success, versus moments where you would love a do-over, that it would have made things much easier?
I think I should have fired people a lot faster than I did. I should have stopped people pleasing. There were so many people that started out great and became very toxic. And I know that sounds dramatic, but like, literally, it was just years of cleaning that up, because also they infect each other. So what ends up happening is you have one bad egg, a bad egg puts the idea in somebody else's head, and it's like you almost have to like start from scratch. It's rough. That's one thing I would have done. The other thing that I do give myself kudos for is I spent the money when I was not very profitable to grow my business by hiring that coach. His thing was called the perfect week. And he was like, what would your perfect week look like? What if there was ways of like taking it out of your brain and putting it on your team so you could grow your business and be happy about what you're going to do and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, I need that. And at the time, I think my company was doing about $350,000 a year. So it wasn't like we had tons of money to spend on this. And the program was, I don't know, $8,000 or something like that. And it was right before the pandemic hit. And so having someone who had also been through some economic downturns and other things, and me just being able to get on the phone being like, is this normal? Is this normal? He's like, just take the time and do all my work. You have a window. You have to reframe this. You have a window where you actually have time to do the work. So you're working on your business instead of in your business. And that stuff, that catapulted me and like tripled my business like in a year because of what it unlocked for me. So I think that is something that I did, like taking that risk was really, really big. And then, following through on that. And then when there were things that I was like, I just don't have the skill set to do this. I had other people on my team who loved writing down checklists and SOPs and all that stuff. And then continuously learning. So when that coach stopped coaching, then I found other coaches that were at the next level for me, because who's going to get you from this place to this place is different than someone who's going to get you from this place to this place. And that's, just part of it. And it's the same thing with your teams. The person who's taking you from 0 to 500,000 is probably different than the person who's taking you from 500,000 to 2 million. It's different, and all that kind of stuff. So it's been really, really interesting. And, I'm learning all the time and I'm looking at different ideas, and I'm not making tons of decisions right now because I have a, almost 3-year-old at home, which is very, very time consuming. And I know that at some point she is going to consistently sleep through the night, which I'm really looking forward to. So when that happens, like I'm going to be on fire. But until then,
Yeah, that's the comment that I wanted to make, that you have been so good at recognizing when you need to bring in these other resources, when you need to bring in training, when you need to bring in people who complement you and fill the gaps, where you've recognized you're really in tune with where the gaps are in yourself in terms of what you want to be doing, what you excel at doing, and what you don't want to do, and what might not be your strength, and finding ways to address them. And I think that's really admirable.
thank you. I mean, I learned it from my mom, who is amazing at outsourcing all sorts of activities. She's like, oh, I don't want to clean. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. In my home life, I have outsourced everything I can. So I've outsourced pretty much laundry. I've outsourced cooking. I've outsourced every possible thing that I can, so that when I want to spend time with my daughter, I can spend time with my daughter and I'm not stressed that, oh my God, the plates are overfilled or those kinds of things. And I'm lucky, we're lucky to have the resources to be able to do that. So that's the only benefit of having a kid at 41 is that you have a lot more money than you did, if I had had my daughter at 30 or whatever.
Sure. No, so just to wrap things up, if you were to talk to a woman who's in a safe, secure corporate job, but she's miserable and she's thinking about going off and starting her own business, what words of wisdom would you offer to her?
If you are really afraid, start small. Get your first client. Get one person to give you money for something, and then execute on that thing, and then get somebody else to give you money, and then execute on that thing, and then get somebody else to give you some money and execute on that thing. And then start to figure out it doesn't have to all be huge, all in, all the time. Okay. That's one approach. The other approach is say, I'm out, and go and just start your thing that you're doing. A lot of things that I've also heard that have been really cool success stories is people quitting and then their companies becoming their first client. That's a really cool opportunity where it's like, okay, you're in marketing. You're not really into the 9 to 5 thing, or you have family obligations where you just can't do it. And you can come back to your old boss who probably loved you. I never say burn any bridges unless it's something really bad. And just be like, I know that they're hiring for this thing. I know that they're hiring for that thing, and put your hand in the ring because they already know you and you can start that way. But if I'm somebody who really hates what I'm doing and I don't have children, I would do the 6 to 9 thing to start, and the weekends, to see who will pay me for what and what people are asking for and what I can be a resource for. And you may not be as good as you want to be. You may not be delivering at the level that you want to be. You're going to have to start experimenting with different marketing things. You just need to start getting some customers. And then once you get customers, then you start to get confidence. And then the confidence creates momentum, and then you start to move. And so, that's one approach. Another approach is, you raise money, you create a business plan, you do all these things, and you do it much more systematically. But even people with 5-year business plans, you really don't know what's going to happen. You just don't. Another thing that I think is completely underlooked and a very interesting opportunity is to buy an existing business that already has trajectory and cash flow and all that kind of stuff. And you come in and you either apply for a job in that business and then buy it from the owner, which is what my husband did, or you just find an opportunity that's already going where you're not having to invent the wheel. I think startups are incredibly difficult and there's a lot more risk because you just don't have the infrastructure in place. I mean, people have done all the hard work for you when you buy an existing business. Now, that being said, you have to do a lot of homework to make sure that it actually is doing what they say it's going to do. And you have to there's great programs out there who are teaching people how to buy businesses and things like that. But if you're interested in something, there's probably somebody who's already doing what you're interested in, and they're 5, 7, 10 years in, and you could grow it to the next level. And then you could just buy it from them and then just go do that and go from there. And that's a really interesting thing that a lot of people wouldn't ever consider. They always think they got to start everything from scratch. And that really isn't true. And there's plenty of opportunities like Biz Scout, Biz Buy Sell, like business brokers have all these different opportunities. I was actually talking to a business broker recently, and he's like, well, I have a business that's adjacent to your business. They do like installations and and this woman's got 60 projects at a time. And she's totally overwhelmed. She even worked in the business. If you wanted to buy, she just doesn't want to be responsible for payroll. I totally understand that mindset. And then he goes, and all the customers are residential. And I go, 100% not interested. 100% not interested. No, thank you.
Residential customers, a whole different breed than commercial.
No,
right?
no. That's an example of like, we're always looking at these business adjacent where they've got trajectory, it's going to work already, and then it can go. Or franchises are another example of that. If you are more risk adverse, that's a way of diminishing a lot of risk. And so those are just different ways of doing it. And it's fun. It's really fun. I mean, once it starts working, it's really fun. It doesn't always work though. So then you got to figure out like how to make it work. And you have to be okay with that too.
Yeah. What is your plan B?
Yeah.
And be able to recognize, when it's not working and when it's time to pivot versus when maybe you just need to give it a little extra time.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes you just got to sit in it. Like last year, I just sat in it. I sat and I was like, listen, every single business owner that I am talking to is like survive to 25. Every single one. Just get through this, do the best you can. And that was absolutely my experience last year. People were just not making decisions. The election's over, regardless of your feelings on the election results. People were like, okay, there's a decision. Now we can make one. The tariffs did the same thing, by the way. So as soon as the tariffs hit this year and the stock market tanked for a month or whatever it was, it literally was 8 weeks of people being like, I don't know. And then as soon as it was like, okay, well, actually, we're only doing 10% tariffs. It's like, okay, well, now we know what it's going to be. There's some certainty here. I know how I can progress and go from there. So all this kind of wishy-washy behavior makes people skittish to make choices, and that can impact your business and your bottom line.
Yeah, really takes a tough soul to be able to roll with it and be able to.
And, but I also will say, like, it takes a tough soul to put up with the bullshit of corporate America.
This is true too.
When you have, your coworkers and you're like, this person is a moron and I am dealing, on a regular basis, my boss is dumber than I am. And I have to sort of put up with whatever they're doing. That is also a form of risk, in my opinion, because you only have one chance to live this life and do these things and to have these experiences. And so, listen, it's like I could decide that Green Wallscapes isn't for me, sell it and move on and go do something else, go get a job somewhere, take a couple years off and do whatever I want to do. Who knows? Or I could just keep rolling with it, and that's the luxury that I have at this time, having built this and other things like that. Startups are hard. You just have to be like, okay, startups are hard. Like that is what they are. It gets easier, I'd say 5+ years in. It's almost identical to children. Like 0 to 1, you're just like, what's happening? 1 to 3, you're like, this is bad, but I'm starting to get some legs. It's starting to walk a little bit, but I'm still making sure it's not going to die all the time. Then you start to get to year 4, year 5. You're like, I know what this is. I'm used to this now. I'm used to the energy of this now, that kind of thing. And then, a lot of businesses past 5 years, I think the reason that, if a business fails between year 5 and year 10 is because the operators just had it with payroll and, having to come up with that money every couple of weeks, or had it with management, or had it with something else, or the market shifts and then they just don't adjust with it, that kind of thing. So it's, it's interesting. It's a choice. It's a choice. Like all things in life. My mother would always say, it's a choice. That's a choice. And so that has been, and I do the same thing to my daughter. I'm like, all right, well, this is your choice, but you're not going to like what's going to happen afterwards. And in other cases, you're like, wow, that turned out way better than I thought it was going to.
Words of wisdom built on experience. Your story is really inspirational, and I appreciate you talking about the harder parts of building that business and being really honest about it. So many people aren't. So many people just paint, like, look at what I've done, look at what I've built. This has been great. So I love hearing the warts and all. That's what's really valuable to women who are looking at building a business.
So many great ways of doing it. And there's money and opportunities literally everywhere. So it's just, you've got to find it and you've got to get them.
There you go. Perfect place to end. Lindsay Scherr Burgess, the Moss Boss. Where can we find you? Where can we see your beautiful work?
So you can check us out online. Our website is greenwallscapes.com. You can also find us on almost all social, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and all the other ones, YouTube, etc. So hope to connect with you there too.
Wonderful. Thank you again, Lindsay.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks again to Lindsay Scherr Burgess for sharing the Green Wallscapes story. In today's hustle culture, her notion of seasons was a breath of fresh air, an acknowledgement that sometimes dialing it back and coasting for a while can be the best thing you can ever do for your business, family, and your own mental health. If you're interested in ordering your own moss wall or simply want to check out some cool samples of their work, head to greenwallscapes.com. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you'd like to share your own entrepreneurial journey, we'd love to hear from you at thefemalefoundersproject.com. Thanks for listening and keep innovating.